Hi, I'm Rick Reef. Welcome to SoCal Insider. The 2011 death of schizophrenic homeless man Kelly Thomas in a confrontation with Fullerton cops was shocking and momentous. The incident fueled outrage on the internet, citizen protests, and the ouster of Fullerton's Old Guard City Council and its police chief. But whatever mistakes were made or misdeeds committed, an Orange County jury has decided that Thomas's death was not murder, acquitting 2 Fullerton cops of all charges. We'll examine the verdict and the lessons of this tragic case. And a blue ribbon panel paints a dismal outlook for the city of LA. Too few businesses, too much poverty, and not enough money for basic services. Is it really that bad? And is the answer, as some want, a $15 minimum wage? But first, earthquakes. It's been exactly 20 years since the Northridge quake shook the region, leaving death and destruction. Are we better prepared for the next one, and just when might that be? David Nazar, what's the story?
Rick, trying to guess when the next big quake is going to hit is, well, just that, a guessing game. However, there are a lot of very smart people working to make us better prepared, because the question obviously isn't if Southern California will be hit with another major earthquake, it's when. The Golden State has always been earthquake country, and yet that hasn't stopped generations of Californians from planting roots along one of the world's most famous faults, the San Andreas. The San Andreas Fault basically runs from the Coachella Valley northwest through San Bernardino, on into Palmdale, through the Grapevine, and then further northwest to San Francisco and beyond. Yet what some folks don't know is that in Southern California, the last major earthquake on the San Andreas was more than 150 years ago. In other words, we're due. And while the San Andreas is most likely to be the source of our largest earthquakes, there are hundreds of other faults throughout Southern California that could also cause devastating damage, especially if centered near urban areas like downtown Los Angeles.
We have many subsidiary faults that are essentially laced through the Los Angeles region. For example, the Hollywood sign sits up on a hill. Below that sign is a big fault, the Hollywood Fault. And those faults can produce large earthquakes that can be very damaging in this urban environment.
Take, for example, the 6.7 Northridge quake in January of 1994. That quake was not centered on the San Andreas, yet it killed 57, injured 5,000, and caused $20 billion in property damage, including almost total destruction of Cal State Northridge. No one wants a repeat of that or any death and destruction from any other quake. And that's why a brain trust of scientists like Dr. Thomas Jordan have gathered at the Southern California Earthquake Center at USC. This team of experts is discussing new advances in research and forecasting and the various collaborations since the Northridge quake, all part of an effort to keep us safe when the big one hits. For example, in the last 2 decades, there has been a more proficient partnership with various individuals, schools, businesses, organizations, communities, and government entities on the local, state, and federal level. Scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey have also united a multidisciplinary team that spans a multitude of specialties, including academia, emergency response, and industry, working to better understand the long-term effects and damage California will sustain in the event of an enormous earthquake. And there are new advances in technology and information gathering. For example, cutting-edge, digital-age supercomputers being used to simulate and understand earthquakes, and graphics, maps, and animations of known faults today versus 20 years ago. And yet, with all this scientific genius, there's still just one problem. Of course, the million-dollar question, when is the next big one going to hit us?
Well, if you know the answer to that, I would like for you to tell me, because we can't predict earthquakes.
Why can't anyone tell us when the next big one's going to hit?
Because you want only to tell the big one, right? You don't want me to predict every earthquake. You want me to predict the magnitude of the future earthquakes. We have 50 earthquakes every day. The Earth probably does not know how big an earthquake will be until it actually happens. During the earthquake, as it ruptures, if it runs into something that stops it, it stops. If it doesn't, it keeps on going. And the Earth may not have the information in it of where that is going to happen. And if you can't tell that, they're by definition unpredictable.
However, since the Northridge quake, technology has advanced to where scientists have a better perception of what we're in for.
We are getting a much better understanding of how frequently these events occur, where they occur, how big they might be. And all of that can be used to sort of cast probabilities to say, okay, in the next 50 years, we expect the shaking, let's say right here where we're standing in central Los Angeles, to be as large as some particular value. We can then use that value to design our buildings to withstand that shaking.
Dr. Jones says she's concerned that not all buildings in Southern California are currently being designed to withstand that shaking. USGS estimates that in the event of a large earthquake along the San Andreas, there could be $200 billion in damages. And Jones says if a huge earthquake hits on a day when the Santa Ana winds are swirling, there could be billions more in damage from the fires all over the region.
What is at risk is our urban society, because living here requires more than these buildings. This building's been retrofitted. Some other buildings haven't, okay? But there's also a water system underneath that brings us water. There's an electrical system. There's a communication system. There's a waste disposal system. All of those are essential to urban life. Building codes aren't retroactive. Problem number one, okay? Old buildings are definitely a problem. Problem number two, nobody wants to spend a lot of money on their building.
Jones says that even today, when earthquakes are inevitable, a small minority of developers and contractors are still trying to cut corners and not spend the extra money to construct buildings to current standards. That was part of the problem at Cal State Northridge back in '94 when the earthquake hit. Almost every building on campus was either damaged or destroyed. In part, that's because universities don't have the same level of inspection requirements that K-12 schools have. So in the aftermath of the quake, building experts reported that contractors on the CSUN campus did in fact cut some corners due to expense, accounting for some of the damage. Of course, not to be forgotten, the campus experienced the highest levels of shaking in the Northridge quake. Kate Long is a research specialist in the earthquake program with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Long says Governor Brown's office is trying to do all it can to safeguard the public for the likelihood of this no-notice event.
At the state level, we work with the local partners, our local government, the federal government, other state agencies to look at the hazards, and that's where science brings us hazard assessment. We look at what the earth is going to do, what that means to the built environment. That's information from engineers. Look at the social scientists. What is that going to mean to economic impacts? And then we look at the gaps. What are the needs going to be? And then we work on capabilities. And where are the resources that people are going to need, so we can be ready to deploy them quickly.
What can the state be doing to better prepare us for an earthquake? Because many on the local level do complain that the state is not doing enough. They've cut back the funding, and you folks need to do more.
Well, certainly we have to compete in earthquake preparedness with all sorts of societal needs, and we've been in a time of economic contractions, and the truth is there just isn't money, so we have to make very difficult decisions about what we're going to fund.
Well, there is some good news for Kate Long, who you just saw in the story, and her colleagues. In Governor Brown's new budget, he is proposing about an additional $1.5 million a year to hire more scientists to map the most dangerous earthquake faults in the state. This after about 20 years of not much money for mapping. And by the way, Rick, the catch, though, is that to pay for this service, the governor is proposing higher building permit fees. I think it's about $100 more on a $1 million house, for example, and about double that rate for commercial construction.
Okay, David, you know, there's talk in this piece about retrofitting, making sure new structures are, you know, up to handling a big one. But what's this news that's been going on in Hollywood now, where there's a group that's saying, forget retrofitting, we want to create a corridor where there's no construction whatsoever, because some of this new mapping you referred to shows that maybe these faults are running, you know, where people want to build. And interestingly, that Millennium Project, that big high-rise they've proposed for Hollywood, is in the crosshairs of this group. And maybe I detect a bit of an agenda there, but, you know, what's that all about?
Well, you heard from the doctor in my story, the scientist who mentioned there is that huge fault underneath the Hollywood sign in the Hollywood Hills area. Sometimes these issues, sadly, do get politicized. Of course, there are NIMBYs and residents who don't want anything built, anything more in the Hollywood Hills. There are, of course, fault lines, and there are some concerned residents who say there should be a no building zone corridor because of the risk of an earthquake. The question is it being politicized, or is this true science that's being vetted out, Rick?
Politicizing science in Southern California, I've never heard of such a thing. thing. But anyway, David, folks that are concerned about this and want to get some information, want to know what to do with in preparation for an earthquake, what should they do?
Good. Thanks for asking, because for folks who do want more information on earthquake preparedness, all you have to do is go to earthquakecountry.org. That's earthquakecountry.org. Really quickly, Rick, I should mention there are many things folks should do, obviously, to be prepared for an earthquake. Of course, just to name a few. Have an abundant supply of water at your home, fire extinguishers, flashlights. Be sure to secure your home so in the event of a quake, there's nothing to go flying off the shelves or the counters. Interestingly, though, Rick, what we obviously didn't have back in '94 during the Northridge quake was texting. For once, authorities are encouraging texting, especially if power and the phone lines are out.
Okay, so maybe when the big one hits, it's the teenagers who will save us, and if they don't, then they can go to Hunger Games or something. But anyway, since we didn't really answer that question, though, there are some people who have kind of guessed about the big one, and they say that, you know, if you define it, we're talking something bigger than the Northridge quake. We're talking like the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, that, you know, there's a 50-50 chance in the next 30 years that Southern California will get hit with something like that. And if it happens, you probably don't want to be on the I-15. That's about the best guessing I think that we can do. Okay, anyway, thanks, David. And now, joining me for this edition of Consider This, Norberto Santana, editor of the investigative news agency Voice of OC, and Hillel, Aron, reporter for LA Weekly. Welcome, gentlemen.
How you doing, Dick?
Norberto, let's get right into this verdict on Kelly Thomas, the homeless man who died after a beating at the hands of Fullerton police back in 2011. Right. The trial was just over, very emotional, and the jury decided that whatever happened, it wasn't murder. You had the unprecedented case of two cops, one charged with second-degree murder, the other one with manslaughter. They were let off. A third cop who's been charged now will not be prosecuted. We may not have seen the end of all of it. What's going on?
Well, that's basically what it's coming down to. Juries, especially in Orange County, seem to be not interested in essentially finding that officers can make those types of mistakes under the color of authority. Now, basically, you're beginning to see a lot of attention towards implementation of things like Laura's Law to deal with more with mentally ill homeless people. The ACLU is calling for increased attention to police review commissions, basically saying when these situations arise, you can't depend on a jury of your neighbors to basically do much in terms of accountability with police officers. And so,
having said that, the two cops lost their jobs.
Correct.
One of them now says he's going to try to get his job back,
right.
but they were disciplined. I mean, they lost their jobs, and certainly their lives, you know, have been changed forever. I'm wondering, is it unfair to the jury to suggest they didn't get it right? After all, you've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. Did the prosecution prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt?
Well, I think that by all accounts, Tony Rakakis, our district attorney, presented a credible case. I think that, again, some of the talk now about things like Laura's Law, police review commissions, I think the question is ultimately, maybe that's not the right venue to have that discussion about what type of force should be used. I think that in some ways, Orange County's been having a more important discussion from day one, which is why was someone like Kelly Thomas being dealt with in a parking lot in the middle of the night by police officers instead of a better governmental response, which I think everybody agrees would have turned out a lot better.
Right. Hillel, in LA, there's been any number of cases of police violence. Obviously, the most notable many years ago, the Rodney King verdict. Are juries just, you know, are people, is it that they are against these defendants or against the people, the victims, or that they just say cops have a tough job and we're going to give them a wide berth?
Yeah, I think juries like cops and people like cops. Voters consistently give cops and firefighters raises year after year, and they're just popular.
Yeah, and you know, Norberto, what you said, it's interesting, something that wasn't covered too much. Apparently, a few months before the incident in Fullerton, Kelly Thomas was a problem. Let's face it. I mean, he was a violent. He was at times violent. But there was an incident in Tustin where he had done something in a store, I think, and in Tustin, where they've done a lot of training in working with the homeless, it was diffused. They picked him up, they took him in, they booked him, they let him go, and it was the end of the story. It seemed like in the Fullerton thing, right at the get-go, it was confrontational. Stick your legs out, do this, do that. And do you think the police in Southern California have learned anything from this episode?
I think, again, what we've all learned is that you don't want necessarily to put police officers in a situation where you're asking them to be doctors, psychologists. It's like using a hammer for everything. It's not the right tool in that situation. As you said, a little bit of proactive policy takes a Kelly Thomas situation, and you don't end up with that picture being thrown all over the country of a man beaten to death.
Hillel, do we have to rethink how we handle the homeless? I mean, I can see some people saying, you know, in the name of mercy, we, you know, don't institutionalize people like we used to. And so we have a bunch of people like Kelly Thomas out on the streets who really need help, and that we're not really helping them by giving them their freedom, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I'm reminded of how, you know, we send the Army out there to do peacekeeping work. And, you know, are these guys trained to do peacekeeping work, or are they trained to shoot people? And I could see the same thing with dealing with the homeless population, is why not have a different job class that's trained for it?
Yeah. Okay. Still to be determined is whether, as we speak, there's been talk the federal government might get involved with civil rights charges. Kelly Thomas's father still has a lawsuit, a civil suit seeking damages against Fullerton. What do you think is likely to happen with those two?
You know, in some cases, it's different thresholds. There's different legal thresholds. I mean, at the end of the day, the police keep coming back to this case, which is again and again the same thing, is they did what they were trained to do. So it's difficult to know whether a civil rights case, obviously in Rodney King, was a very different result.
Yeah. Okay. Hillel, let's talk about L.A. And this report called 2020. Maybe it should be called Blade Runner 2. Only it's not a movie now. It's a report from a blue ribbon panel saying L.A.'s going to hell in a handbasket. Tell us about it.
The report is called A Time for Truth. So very very dramatic title. It's a funny little report. It sort of has the feel of something that was written up kind of at the last minute. It's not very long. Usually when you get these reports, they're like really long, and they have like an executive summary and an index. And this is sort of like 20 pages. It's got kind of a big font. It's like padded out with, you know, charts and stuff. And it's these big downtown machers like you know, Mickey Canner. Well, he's a West Sider, but Mickey Canner, Austin Butner, and Dave Fleming.
Ray Davis, former governor.
Ray Davis, the kind of people that are always on these you know, commissions.
So what's wrong with L.A. in there?
Well, it's a lot of little things, really. It's not. It's just sort of a hodgepodge. You know, the economy's crap. The pension system is spiraling out of control. The traffic's bad. The schools are bad. It's just kind of a bunch of little bullet points like that, and you know, have some of that.
Yeah, and so do they propose any?
No. Supposedly they're going to have a new report within 60 days, I think, about the solutions, proposed solutions.
Well, that maybe is where,
which is going to be interesting, because the committee is actually made up of these ideologically divergent people. You got a couple of union heads on there, and then you've got more of like the business class on there, like Butner and Canner. So it's going to be interesting to see what they actually agree on solution-wise.
Is this who thought of this thing? How did this thing come up?
City Council President Herb Wesson commissioned the report last year, kind of like in the middle of the mayor's race. So it's weird timing, but it's almost like a throwback. There was a committee that did this in 1988, and it was called the Los Angeles 2000 Commission, and that was delivered to Tom Bradley, and it had some dire warnings about where the city was heading. And you know, 4 years before the riots, I think that they had some good warnings in there.
Yeah. So, but other than a warning, is anything likely to result from this?
I don't know. I mean, there is this building momentum to do something about the pensions, which I think is kind of the one thing that most people agree on really needs to get tackled.
Yeah, Norberto, maybe L.A. is the most stark example in our region. It's obviously the biggest city in Southern California. Are some of these problems something we all share?
Absolutely. I mean, these problems are, when you say problems, they're the challenges of local government, which in some cases, I mean, I was always stunned that during the mayoral election, you know, I think it was something like $150 million budget deficit was just really not addressed at all. So it's these things where we constantly allow politicians to throw us political candy during campaigns and avoid answering nuts and bolts questions. I think, frankly, most cities across America have erected police and fire forces that are unsustainable. Whether that's right or wrong, you can't run a city that way. You can't put off infrastructure.
There's so much money going in the police and fire, and a lot of it not for hiring cops and firefighters, but just giving them benefits.
Right. Right, and that's not a lot of people think it's not a sustainable program. Many people would hope that the next solution part is figuring out, almost as a local government, what is your niche product, do that well, pay those people well, but maybe there's certain services or certain efficiencies that you shouldn't be in the business of.
Okay, Hillel, of course, one idea that somebody's come up with, we've got this report that says we've got growing income disparity, and yet we're not friendly to business, so now, $15 an hour minimum wage. What's that proposal about?
Yeah, this comes from the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. They are pushing for a $15 an hour minimum wage for hotel workers, for all hotel workers across the city, working in large hotels, 100 or more rooms. This is already a similar policy has been enacted in hotels near LAX. So this would just be extending it to the entire city.
Again, why do I detect some kind of an agenda here? Why just hotel workers? Why not anybody making $7 an hour or $8 an hour, which is kind of the going minimum wage? Let's make it $15 an hour. Why hotel workers?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of classic LA, right? You take a problem that, income inequality is a big problem in LA, big problem all over the country. And all right, well, let's work on that problem, but for a small group of people that happens to have political clout.
Okay, so is this, it seems like, given the political constitution of LA, this could very well go through. And I mean, this will be a minimum wage. It's like double anywhere else.
Yeah. To be fair, it's just we're talking about maybe 10,000 employees. So it is a small sector of the economy. And again, to be fair, this is also a sector of the economy that can't be outsourced. You can't outsource folding bed sheets in the middle of the night. So I do think they have a point. On the other hand, you raise the wages. That's just the costs are going to get passed on to the consumer. That could affect tourism or where people stay. Maybe people decide to stay either outside of Los Angeles or in smaller hotels, stuff like that. Airbnb.
Norberto, it seems like this issue of the income disparity is something I think that everybody agrees to now. We do have this widening gap. The issue is, how do you address it? Do you do it by taking jobs where people aren't making enough and essentially mandating that they'll make more, or do you just create more jobs? And then you have more jobs and people in these, that are in the low wage jobs.
How do you do that? How do you just create more jobs?
Well, I'm saying, you do it with policies. In other words, it's you make a good point. Go ahead, expound on that. Why not just create more jobs?
Well, that's what everyone wants
policies
to do. Yeah.
that create it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what everyone wants to do. Just create more jobs. Well, if it were that easy, they'd be doing it in a heartbeat.
Well, how about making, going back to LA, have less onerous regulations on businesses so people can start businesses more easily?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are in favor of that.
Okay. All right. Well, it
is somewhat of they're admitting that we live in a world now where people will work at fast food, hotel jobs for their whole life. So it's almost, in a sense, throwing in the towel and saying, just raise the income.
Norberto, you get the last word. Thanks, gentlemen. You can watch this show and past shows at rickreef.com. Segments of the show can also be viewed at pbssocal.org. My guests have been Norberto Santana and Hillel Aron. Thanks for watching. See you again on SoCal Insider.
SoCal Insider with Rick Reef is brought to you by the following. 5 Point Communities is a proud sponsor of PBS SoCal. 5 Point Communities is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. More information available at www.fivepointcommunities.com. Snell & Wilmer is a full-service business law firm with more than 400 attorneys in Orange County, Los Angeles, and throughout the West. On the web at swlaw.com. Snell & Wilmer. Straight talk, sound counsel. Practical solutions.
Relief Pod's latest generation of safety kits now go everywhere you go. Relief Pod's organized, color-coded, and compact safety kits keep first aid and emergency items accessible for a safe lifestyle every day. Relief Pod. Live ready.
A healthy future for you, your family, and your business is why Memorial Care Health System transformed healthcare. Our hospitals, physicians, and outpatient centers keep patients healthy and care for them when they're not. Memorial Care, one healthcare system leading the way.
Almost everyone in America knows someone who's suffering from Alzheimer's. At UC Irvine, we're discovering new treatments for this devastating disease.